The accessibility of an air conditioning disconnect switch and its compliance with the National Electrical Code, specifically Section 110.26 regarding working space, is a crucial safety consideration. Code Section 110.26 establishes minimum working space requirements around electrical equipment that is likely to require examination, adjustment, servicing, or maintenance while energized. The intent of this code section is to provide sufficient space for electricians and other qualified personnel to safely perform their work. The term readily accessible means capable of being reached quickly for operation, renewal, or inspections without requiring those to whom ready access is requisite to climb over or remove obstacles or to resort to portable ladders, and so forth. Whether the air conditioning switch meets the requirements for ready accessibility according to the NEC depends on several factors. Firstly, the location of the switch must be easily reachable. There should be no obstructions preventing a person from quickly accessing the switch in case of an emergency or for routine maintenance. Secondly, the height of the switch should be within a reasonable range, typically not exceeding 6 feet 7 inches from the finished floor or platform, unless specific exceptions apply. Thirdly, the path to the switch should be clear and unobstructed. Any obstacles such as stored materials, equipment, or structural elements that impede access would render the switch not readily accessible. Now, to determine if the air conditioning switch violates the 110.26 working space rules, several factors must be examined. The NEC specifies minimum dimensions for the working space in front of electrical equipment, including depth, width, and height. The depth of the working space is measured horizontally from the front of the electrical equipment to the nearest obstruction. The required depth varies depending on the voltage of the equipment and the presence of exposed live parts. For example, for equipment operating at 150 volts to ground or less, a minimum depth of 3 feet is typically required if there are exposed live parts on both sides of the working space or if exposed live parts are on one side and grounded parts on the other side. If there are no exposed live parts or if exposed live parts are only on one side and there are no grounded parts on the other side, a minimum depth of 3 feet might still be required, but local amendments to the code might dictate something different. For equipment operating at higher voltages, such as 600 volts, the required depth increases. The width of the working space must be at least 30 inches or the width of the equipment, whichever is greater. This width ensures that there is adequate space for personnel to stand and move while working on the equipment. The working space must extend from the floor to a height of at least 6 feet 6 inches or the height of the equipment, whichever is greater. This height ensures that there is sufficient headroom for personnel to work comfortably. If the air conditioning switch does not meet these minimum working space requirements, it violates the 110.26 rules. This violation can create hazardous conditions for personnel who need to access the switch for maintenance or in an emergency. Insufficient working space can make it difficult to safely operate the switch, increasing the risk of electrical shock or other injuries. In the scenario provided, the air conditioning switch is deemed not readily accessible and in violation of the 110.26 working space rules. The statement indicates that the space in front of the switch is only about 24 inches wide and 30 inches deep. This is less than the minimum required space of 30 inches wide and 36 inches deep, as specified by the code. Let's delve deeper into the specifics of NEC 110.26. This section is formally titled Spaces about Electrical Equipment. It is a critical component of the National Electrical Code, designed to ensure the safety of personnel working on or near electrical equipment. The primary purpose of this section is to provide adequate and safe working space around electrical equipment that requires examination, adjustment, servicing, or maintenance while energized. This working space must be maintained clear of obstructions to allow for safe operation and maintenance. The requirements of 110.26 are applicable to all electrical equipment operating at 600 volts, nominal, or less to ground. This includes switchboards, panel boards, distribution boards, motor control centers, and similar equipment. The working space requirements are divided into 3 main dimensions. Firstly, depth of working space. Secondly, width of working space, and thirdly, height of working space. The depth of the working space, as mentioned earlier, is measured horizontally from the front of the electrical equipment to the nearest obstruction. The required depth is determined by the voltage of the equipment and the conditions present in the working space. Table 110.26. A1 provides specific dimensions for different voltage levels and conditions. Condition 1 applies where there are exposed live parts on one side of the working space and no grounded parts on the other side of the working space, or where exposed live parts are on both sides of the working space, but they are effectively protected by insulation or other means. Condition 2 applies where there are exposed live parts on one side of the working space and grounded parts on the other side. Condition 3 applies where there are exposed live parts on both sides of the working space and the operator is required to stand within the space to operate the equipment. The width of the working space must be the width of the equipment, or 30 inches, whichever is greater. This width ensures that there is enough room for personnel to move and work safely. It's important to note that the working space must be clear and unobstructed, meaning that there should be no pipes, ducts, or other equipment located within the required width. The height of the working space must be at least 6 feet 6 inches, or the height of the equipment, whichever is greater. This height provides adequate headroom for personnel to work comfortably and safely. It is essential that the working space is maintained clear of any obstructions that could impede access or create a hazard. In addition to the dimensional requirements, 110.26 also addresses other important considerations. For example, this section requires that the entrance to the working space be of sufficient size to allow for the safe removal of equipment. The section also addresses the need for adequate illumination in the working space. Proper lighting is essential for personnel to see clearly and avoid hazards. Furthermore, 110.26 requires that equipment be arranged so that all disconnecting means are readily accessible. This means that the disconnecting means must be located in a place where they can be easily reached without having to climb over obstacles or move other equipment. The definition of readily accessible is very important. It means capable of being reached quickly for operation, renewal, or inspections, without requiring those to whom ready access is requisite to climb over or remove obstacles or to resort to portable ladders, and so forth. Now, considering the initial statement that the air conditioning switch has a space that is only 24 inches wide and 30 inches deep, it becomes clear that this installation violates the requirements of 110.26. The code mandates a minimum width of 30 inches and, depending on the voltage and conditions, a minimum depth of 36 inches or more. The insufficient working space around the air conditioning switch can create several safety hazards. Firstly, it can make it difficult for personnel to safely operate the switch. The limited space can restrict movement and increase the risk of accidental contact with energized parts. Secondly, it can impede access for maintenance and repairs. If the switch needs to be serviced or replaced, the lack of adequate working space can make the task more difficult and time-consuming, potentially increasing the risk of injury. Thirdly, it can create a tripping hazard. If the working space is cluttered or obstructed, personnel may be more likely to trip and fall, especially if they are carrying tools or equipment. To correct this violation, the working space around the air conditioning switch must be increased to meet the minimum requirements of 110.26. This may involve moving the switch to a different location or rearranging the surrounding equipment. It is also important to ensure that the working space is kept clear of obstructions at all times. Regular inspection should be conducted to verify that the working space is maintained in a safe and accessible condition. In summary, the air conditioning switch in question does not meet the requirements for ready accessibility and violates the 110.26 working space rules. The insufficient width and depth of the working space create a safety hazard and must be corrected to ensure compliance with the National Electrical Code. Adhering to these code requirements is essential for protecting the safety of personnel working on or near electrical equipment. It is also important to consult with a qualified electrical inspector or engineer to ensure that all installations meet the applicable code requirements. Code requirements vary based on local regulations, and it is imperative to comply with all applicable codes to ensure safety. Let's explore the potential consequences of violating NEC 110.26. Non-compliance with this code section can lead to a range of negative outcomes, from minor inconveniences to serious safety hazards and legal repercussions. One of the most immediate consequences of inadequate working space is an increased risk of electrical accidents. When electricians or other qualified personnel are forced to work in cramped or obstructed areas, they are more likely to make mistakes or come into accidental contact with energized parts. This can result in electrical shock, burns, or even electrocution. Moreover, insufficient working space can impede the speed and efficiency of maintenance and repair work. When technicians have difficulty accessing equipment or maneuvering their tools, tasks take longer to complete and are more prone to errors. This can lead to extended downtime, increased labor costs, and reduced productivity. Violations of 110.26 can also create obstacles for emergency responders. In the event of an electrical fire or other emergency, firefighters and other first responders need to be able to quickly and easily access electrical equipment to shut off power and mitigate the situation. Inadequate working space can delay their response and put lives at risk. From a legal standpoint, non-compliance with the NEC can result in fines, penalties, and even legal liability. Electrical inspectors have the authority to issue citations and order corrective action for code violations. In some cases, repeated or egregious violations can lead to criminal charges. Furthermore, if someone is injured or killed as a result of a code violation, the property owner or responsible party may be held liable for damages. Insurance companies may also refuse to cover losses resulting from code violations. For example, if a fire is caused by faulty electrical wiring and it is determined that the wiring was not installed in accordance with the NEC, the insurance company may deny the claim. In addition to the direct consequences of non-compliance, there are also indirect costs to consider. For example, code violations can damage a company's reputation and erode public trust. Customers may be hesitant to do business with a company that has a history of safety violations. Furthermore, code violations can lead to increased scrutiny from regulatory agencies and higher insurance premiums. To avoid these negative consequences, it is essential to prioritize compliance with NEC 110.26 and other applicable codes. This requires a commitment to proper planning, design, installation, and maintenance of electrical systems. Property owners, facility managers, and electrical contractors all have a responsibility to ensure that electrical work is performed safely and in accordance with code requirements. Regular inspections and audits can help identify and correct potential code violations before they lead to accidents or other problems. It is also important to provide adequate training to personnel who work on or near electrical equipment. Employees should be familiar with the requirements of the NEC and other applicable safety standards. They should also be trained on how to identify and avoid potential hazards. Furthermore, it is important to stay up to date on the latest changes to the NEC. The code is updated every 3 years to reflect new technologies, best practices, and lessons learned from past accidents. By staying informed and proactive, organizations can minimize the risk of code violations and create a safer working environment for everyone. So, revisiting the main issue, the 24-inch wide and 30-inch deep space in front of the AC switch clearly falls short of the required dimensions. This deficiency constitutes a violation of NEC 110.26 and presents a potential safety hazard. The code mandates a minimum width of 30 inches and a minimum depth that varies depending on the voltage and conditions, but is typically at least 36 inches for the voltage levels commonly found in air conditioning systems. The inadequate working space can make it difficult for technicians to safely operate the switch, perform maintenance, or respond to emergencies. It can also increase the risk of electrical shock, burns, and other injuries. To rectify this violation, the working space around the AC switch must be expanded to meet the minimum requirements of NEC 110.26. This may involve relocating the switch, reconfiguring the surrounding equipment, or a combination of both. It is crucial to consult with a qualified electrical contractor or engineer to determine the best course of action and ensure that the corrected installation complies with all applicable codes and regulations. Moreover, it is essential to maintain the working space clear of obstructions at all times. Tools, equipment, and other materials should not be stored in the working space, as they can impede access and increase the risk of accidents. Regular inspections should be conducted to verify that the working space remains unobstructed and that the AC switch is readily accessible. In addition to the dimensional requirements of NEC 110.26, there are other factors to consider when evaluating the safety and accessibility of electrical equipment. For example, the location of the equipment should be chosen to minimize the risk of damage or exposure to hazardous conditions. Equipment should be protected from physical damage, such as impact from vehicles or machinery. It should also be protected from moisture, dust, and other environmental factors that could compromise its performance or safety. Furthermore, the equipment should be located in an area that is well ventilated and free from flammable materials. Overheating and fire are potential hazards associated with electrical equipment, and proper ventilation and fire prevention measures are essential. In conclusion, the 24-inch by 30-inch space in front of the AC switch is insufficient and violates NEC 110.26. This violation must be corrected to ensure the safety of personnel and compliance with applicable codes and regulations. By prioritizing safety and adhering to code requirements, organizations can create a safer working environment and minimize the risk of electrical accidents. And remember, always consult with qualified professionals for electrical work and code compliance to ensure safety and accuracy.